So it's kind of I'm not exactly sure how to explain what's been going on in my mind lately. A lot about survival, because I've come to the conclusion that there's some kind of event that's going to happen in the near immediate future where my life could be in danger because I'm not prepared for it, such as like civil unrest or economic collapse, food shortages, food inflation, specifically inflation with food, losing like my water, losing my electricity for extended period of time. And then, then the other problems that I have is with a lot of thinking a lot about my own death. If I all of a sudden, just out of the blue, I'm dead, or something happens and I'm dead, I'm dying, or I'm in the middle of doing something, or I'm not really, and I've never really been prepared. How do you prepare for that? I mean, is it, I've thought a lot about it, and I've thought a lot about, okay, I know I'm conscious. I know I can experience myself. And looking and watching from my own life experience others around me that are of similar physical appearance and nature, being humans, that I presume that they're like me. They have they think and they feel and they have an individual sense of themselves, and they have basically the same wants and needs and desires that I do, basic, all, hunger, thirst, needs for food, shelter, sex, food, water, and the basic things. And then there's a sense of having, of making of well-being and of maintaining your sense of well-being, continuity of a security, a certain amount of security in living, being alive. And then maybe because I've changed to a plant-based diet, I'm thinking more along the lines of, well, that there's a part of me maybe that's getting more sensitive to animals, and I notice animals more when I'm outside. I notice the birds more. I notice squirrels more. I'm aware of other animals around me a lot, and I've been like buying wild animal food and putting it around my porch in the backyard, and then I got bird feeders, and I got a hummingbird feeder, and I feed squirrels and other critters out in my yard. And I watch these animals, I look at animals and I think, there's someone there. I mean, they may not be able to articulate their own presence of themselves as an entity. They couldn't, they don't have a verbal communication or a symbolic level of communication that informs me of them as being individuals. But what I'm doing is I'm presuming that other animals that are non-human animals have that same sense of self, of presence of their mind, that they are aware of themselves as an organism, that they have an individual self-identity that may not be able to articulate, that may not be able to speak and to form sentences or to communicate via symbols, but they are themselves as beings, are present to themselves, that they feel, that they know they exist. They don't intellectually know they exist, but they feel themselves to exist at a moment by moment. So I'm presuming that just as I have a sense of consciousness about who I am, that there's other living organisms that are other than humans, because I've kind of gone past, well, I know humans, logically other humans they're self-aware of themselves, they have feelings, they feel themselves that they exist. So it's just another level of nervous system, a consciousness in a different kind of nervous system. And then what I'm getting to with that is that, and then being a vegan, right? Then you try to, and then it's like people people use animals for a nutrient and for leather or for objects, for entertainment and so on, and they're blind to, or they're deaf and mute. They're deaf to and blind to having that sense that maybe those animals have the same kind of emotional feelings they have, or the same sensorium of feelings of heat and cold, temperature, or hearing and seeing and feeling themselves to exist. Well, they are superior in intellect and in their capacity to breed the animal and harm the animal, bring the animals about and cage the animals and turn them into a product for consumption. And it staggers, it bothers me that it would seem more logical that more people would be aware of that. Now, I'm not good at trying to convince other people to be vegan. I'm very emotional about that topic, and when you're emotional, you tend not to be logical. But I know that at a deeper level, there is a lot of logic to having compassion, to having, like, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, more or less, or trying to fit your own situation as an individual into that other animal. If you went to sleep and you dreamt you were a deer for like an hour, or you went to sleep and you dreamt you were a fish, or maybe so much just to say, okay, this is a little bit far-fetched, but you die and then you wake up, and you wake up as another kind of organism. The same way when you were a baby, before you were born, while you were being born, or what happened early on when you were an infant, you remember you must have had an experience of being that tiny little baby that woke up, that was just like asleep, and then woke up out of just non-existence. You gradually emerged as crying and feeling the need to eat, sleep, and cry, and you took your first breath. You must remember that somewhere in your mind. You must be able to remember being an infant. If you were hypnotized, or if you could think about that, well, just taking that to the next level, your consciousness ends. You die, and your life ends as you know it, but you can never know non-existence. You cannot be a non-existent being that knows you don't exist. You can only be a being that knows it exists. That's the default. The default is you're conscious of yourself. If you're unconscious, then it doesn't matter how much time goes by. See, this is again, the universe was 13.7 billion years ago, the Big Bang. Roughly, the universe formed from energy. It froze out of a crack in the symmetry breaking or whatever at the quantum level, and our universe formed, and then gradually different systems emerged out of that, which eventually led to evolution. In the process of evolution at the biological level, us humans, grew out of that system on this planet. And that if consciousness, if you never know that you can never know you don't exist, just the way you were before you were born, there was no time for you. You have to put yourself in if other beings are as consciousness is something that's equal to, just as you're conscious, other beings can be conscious, just other people can be conscious. We are all individual consciousnesses, individual selves. Well, at the animal level, we are animals, of course. If you don't believe that, then you might as well just turn the video off, because it's kind of the religion, the ideas of religion, which are old ideas that have been superseded by science. That animal is the animals are us. We are the animals. We are animals that are tool-using animals. We use our intentional will, and we reshape the world around us to fit our will and our needs. or as animals, don't have that capacity. There is still, at the root level of the being of the animal being, there is still the mind there. There is still the feeling of the being that it feels itself as existing, whereas humans are very highly intellectually evolved beings, where we communicate in mass and we build things and structures. We keep a recorded history of our in our artifacts and everything. So have thought about we as animal, you and me as animal, us as animal, and also that shared consciousness, that sense of us being aware of ourselves, is also something at the animal in the other animal realms also. Which brings me to veganism. Veganism should be more of a normal way to live. It should be more that than the carnism. Carnism had its place in our past, in prehistoric times. There was a great necessity for humans because there were shortages of food. I mean, evidence is in our own evolutionary lineage that we've had in our own. If you're a heavy-set person, you're probably your family line came from a part of the earth at a time when there was a famine, and the apes, the hominids, the early primitive primates that came from a jungle area, a tropical area where there was more fruit and nuts and seeds and roots and berries and such, that their digestive system was had been more adapted to foliage, like a gorilla or a bonobo or a chimp, then that the famine, the stages of the droughts and the ice ages causing changes in the climate, then people had to migrate. There was probably the sea level was probably a lot lower, and there was more migration around the coastlines. And that once humans had the ability to have fire and know how to make fire and use fire for cooking, then that's when humans adapted themselves to eating meat. That's when we began hunting for meat and eating meat, because if we didn't know fire, I mean, they could salt food also. If you were fishing, you could take the fish and salt the fish if you had places where there was a lot of salt, and then store the fish through the winter. So humans adapted to periods in our history and where there was famines. There was great times of severe where people had to come together in community and migrate to places where there was food. And the only way to get from place to place was to hunt, to get meat, and know how to use a fire. And before that, there was no use of fire. There was a fire was an accident if there was a lightning, or if there was a forest fire somewhere, an animal got charred and burned up, and some hungry hominid, early ape person, probably came along and found the carcass. It was still steaming and smoking, and it smelled good, and they started eating it. So that may have been early humans' first taste of meat, aside from finding a fish and trying to eat a fish raw, or an oyster, or insects probably too. But other than that, we as human primates, we are more adapted to a vegan, vegetarian diet. Milk and milk products only came about after humans learned to raise livestock, to breed, and to manage animals, which wasn't in the North and South American continent. The natives in these parts did not have animal husbandry. They only had they were only hunters and gatherers. Europeans were the ones that came from migrated to the Mesopotamian Middle East, had the animals, raised animals, goats and sheep and cattle, and bred them, domesticated them, and that was where most of our meat came from in our diet. And then fire. Before fire, there was foraging. But there weren't that many people on the earth at the time. There was hundreds of thousands of years ago. There was probably no more ever than 100, maybe 200, 300,000 humans. at one time. Probably always less than 1 million humans up until like when people started doing agriculture. It took a lot of land and a lot of area to make to support human groups of tribes of people. So that's my thoughts on veganism. And probably you're probably thinking, well, I believe reincarnation. Well, having a memory and knowing your alone life's experiences that you remember things because you have a brain and your brain records events. Without physical brain, you don't have a way to remember things. Now, if any memories get transcripted through the genetic, through the gametes, if your genes and your DNA has a pattern for boat building or swimming or being able to do to do some physical feat, or have a physical feature that allows you to do something that's you're more endurance. You have more endurance for cold, or you have an instinct or more of a greater will for certain kinds of habits that make you more adaptable to your environment. Those kinds of memories maybe get transmitted from one off to your offspring. If through many generations of people in that family line, they have a certain characteristic, like a bigger nose, or they have better eyesight, or there's some physical feature of their brain because their ancestors' brains adapted and were selected out for that characteristic. The environment selected it out, and they passed it on to their children's children. So those kinds of characteristics would be passed on. Not you remember you were alive in 1850 in the high school you went to in 1930, and you remember that your grandfather was a pilot, or things like that. No, you would not. Those you wouldn't even remember. Things there is no memory. You don't remember from one life to the other, but you do reemerge. It could be if you're like if you have a lot of children and you have a lot of offspring. Let's say you father a lot of children, then you're more likely. I believe, this is my opinion, you're more likely to reemerge in your future family line at some point in time. Somewhat like if you were to go and see a painting of your great uncle in some castle somewhere, and you look at the painting and you think, wow, that looks just like me. But that could have been. I mean, maybe the pattern, if that person had a DNA sample taken of them and had it encoded digitized their DNA pattern, and then you took a sample of your DNA and compared it to theirs, and it was identical, exactly the same DNA, and that would have been you. But notwithstanding, you can never be in two places at the same time. So that brings about the idea of if you keep going in space for a very far distance, and you keep going further and further out into space, into the past through all these other galaxies, and you see other Earths. That one Earth has a dinosaur on it, another Earth is like a Precambrian explosion on it, another Earth is a water planet, another Earth is a planet with monkeys on it, and then you keep going, and there's another Earth that has human-like monkeys, and you keep going, and finally, through the infinitude of space and all of the possible combinations of planets that are like Earth, there could be somebody just almost exactly identical to you. Then there could be somebody just exactly like you, but you cannot be at two places at the same time. That's what I'm saying. So even in that regard, or in the regard of this universe ends, okay, and then there's another Big Bang in the future, and then in that Big Bang there's another universe, and then that universe ends, and then after that there's another universe, and then that ends, and then there's another one that ends, and etc., and then finally another universe happens, and all the same conditions line themselves up that made you be born. Your parents were there, your grandparents were there, your great-grandparents were there, all the same events, almost exactly the same happen, and boom, you wake up, and you're a baby again. But you died, and then in between you being dead and then that other universe in the very far, 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 far future, you're born, and you come and you wake up as a baby. You're not going to remember being again. You're not going to remember this life. So there's that other idea, and I think that's kind of, you know, if you listen to somebody like Max Tegmark well, he got the idea from John Wheeler, who was a physicist. And then there was other physicists that came up with the idea of parallel worlds, and these are old ideas. Even Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake, had hypothesized that there could be many worlds. Well, that was that was a long time ago. So it's not a new idea. It's just with modern science and the discoveries we've taken with our telescopes, also our investigation into genetic material and our greater understanding of the human brain and what consciousness is. So that's the kind of information that I think about a lot. I think that there is potentially a possibility of that. Oh, I'm just this, of not being this. Oh, I'm unique. There will never be another me. Oh, I'm just this unique person that's like, I'm one of a kind and I'll never happen again. The odds are too astronomical. They're too high of the probability of all of the events lining up and everything. It's too high of an order of mathematical. The number is just too far in grandeur in it. But it's a possibility. If it's physically possible, if it is physically within the laws of physics, could happen, then given enough time, it will happen. That's what I think anyhow. So, signing off.